and get going. We are good to go.
Great. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Lunch Break this week. I'm Carrie, and today we'll be talking with Melissa Fleming to learn about her work and what she's been up to recently. Melissa is an environmental communicator and visual artist. Her artwork, which has exhibited and been collected internationally, is an exploration of the transient and often unseen aspects of the natural world. She's the author of the blog The Weather Gamut, a member of the American Meteorological Society, the International Environmental Communication Association, and she serves as a mentor with the Climate Reality Project. Her work also appeared in our exhibit, Weather the Weather. So throughout the talk, if you have any questions, those who are participating, you can type those into the Q&A box and we'll have a portion at the end to answer some audience questions. Melissa, thank you so much for being with us today. If you want to just start by giving us a little overview of what you do.
Yeah, sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Melissa Fleming. Before I begin, I would like to thank Julia and Carrie for organizing this series of talks and for inviting me to be part of it. So a little bit about me. I wear two different hats, more or less. I'm an artist, but I also write about weather and climate. And while technically different fields, I've found that they do inform each other. So I like to say that I locate my work at the intersection of art and science. And today I'm going to give you a brief overview of the evolution of my artwork, which tends to parallel my interest in and concern for the natural world. Okay, so let's start. Okay, why is this not moving? Here we go. Yeah, curiosity is the foundation of both art and science. I think we can all agree to that. And for as long as I can remember, I've been curious about the natural world. Simply put, I find nature to be endlessly interesting, challenging, and beautiful. I love learning about it and being out in it. So for me, art has always been a way to explore subjects that I'm interested in. And the more I've learned about nature, the more it's intrigued me. Over time, I've come to value nature's more subtle and interesting beauty to be beyond the visible. And so my work has evolved into an investigation of the transient and often unseen aspects of the natural world. So this image is called Willow. It's from one of my very first projects called On the Water, where I photographed reflections on the surface of lakes and ponds. Most of my early work explored the natural world via more formal art qualities of color and composition. It's another example from that early series which spanned the seasons. Another early project of mine was called Wax Flora. I was intrigued by amber fossils and I started photographing plant materials set in wax. Now, while working with the idea of preserving bits of nature, color and composition still played a very important role. Now, I've always been a bit of a water baby, so it's fair to say that within the broad realm of nature, I'm most captivated by water. And this is why I can truly relate to this quote by Mr. Swinburne, who was an English poet from the late 1800s. Oceans in particular have played an important role in my work on a variety of levels. And I have a number of different ocean-based projects, but in the interest of time, I'm only going to share a few of them today. And these images here are from two different projects about wave action. The next few images are from a series called Sentient, which are images of the ocean at night. I was attracted to the duality of the danger and beauty of the ocean and decided to photograph it at night when it feels the most ominous and unnavigable. So in these images, we can only really see the white crash of the waves. They were the only visible sign of the water in the darkness. And this white seemed sentient to me, and in a sense was the mark, excuse me, the mark of the ocean at night. These are a few more examples from the Sentient series. Now, the idea of the mark of the ocean stayed in my mind and led me to experiment with photograms, which literally record the mark of subject. The result was a series called Sea Change. And this was a very physical project that entwined the ocean and sun with the photographic process. Here we see an exhibition view of some of the photograms, and it was at the Heckscher Museum on Long Island. Now, created over the course of the year, the water temperature influenced the color of the images. Warmer water produced more brown tones, and cold water made more black tones. I really enjoyed making these, and overall, the project really got me thinking about nature in new ways. Continuing with the idea that there's more to the ocean than meets the eye, I began to evaporate seawater to obtain the salt that we know is there but cannot see. This led to a series of sculptural assemblages that I call under glass. I was attracted to the ideas of 19th century citizen science, so I started collecting natural objects and placed them under Victorian-style glass domes. Under glass, the objects are singled out for close examination and highlight the act of intense seeing, which is common to both art and science. This particular piece I call Atlantic Ocean 10 Gallons. This piece is called Memory 41 Years and refers to how tree rings tell us the age of a tree and also provide information about the environmental conditions in which it grew. For example, rings that are thicker are from wet years and thinner rings are from dry years. This is Energy 300 million years. Here the glass dome covers a piece of coal and the engraved description references the time it takes for coal to form. Now I enjoyed working with real objects and 3 dimensions, so soon I began incorporating both objects and photographs into small scale installations. In this series I call The Space in Between, and it explores the idea of a system, which is essentially a set of connected things forming a complex whole. Presented on glass shelves, light and space and shadow all play an important role in each grouping. It's another example from that series. Now, continuing with my foray into more sculptural pieces, these are from a series that I call Choices. Nature is not as overtly present here as it is in my other work, so it can be open to interpretation, but it's essentially about choices and direction. I was using large-scale mirrors so they can incorporate the viewer, and they seek to imply that we're all part of the choices that need to be made about the environment. So moving back outdoors, this is from a project that I call the Weather Project, and it's where I capture different atmospheric events and effects. So this particular image shows a circumhorizontal arc, which is different from a rainbow. They form when plate-like ice crystals and cirrostratus clouds or really high clouds refract or bend light. They're fairly rare, so I was pretty excited to see it and to get the photograph of it. So another type of weather event, but much more extreme, is drought. And sadly, they can have devastating consequences, including wildfires, which is the name of this series. So wildfires are a natural part of the ecosystem, but today with rising temperatures and extended periods of drought, they're becoming much more frequent. These next few images were taken in California a few summers ago. It was a bit scary to see these situations unfolding, but it was also really interesting to see the atmospheric effects created by the smoke. But I should also say that with these wildfires and other extreme weather events, I'm not interested in seeing any sort of death or destruction, but I am attracted to the power and drama of these situations. And I also think it's important to document the changes happening to the landscape. Okay, so moving from fire to ice, these images are from my ongoing project called American Glaciers Going, Going, Gone. Essentially massive rivers of ice, glaciers are particularly sensitive to rising temperatures and changing precipitation patterns. And for centuries, glaciers around the world have advanced and retreated in response to localized conditions. And today, as our average global temperature goes up, the vast majority are in retreat. So I just said that glaciers are all over the world, so why am I focusing on the US? Well, there are a number of reasons. But it's mainly because I wanted to show in a visual way how climate change is taking place before our eyes in our own backyard. This particular image is of the Byron Glacier in Alaska. This image was also taken in Alaska, and here we see the meltwater lake forming as the glacier above it retreats. These are icebergs that are broken off from Portage Glacier, which is in southern Alaska. And the lake you see here, which is about 600 feet deep, is all meltwater from that glacier. Back in the lower 48 states, this is the Arapahoe Glacier, the largest glacier left in Colorado. Now, it has lost over 50% of its surface area during the 20th century, and that's important to note because this glacier helps provide water for the city of Boulder. Here we see Skillet Glacier in Wyoming. It's one of only 12 glaciers that remain in Grand Teton National Park. This is Carter Glacier in Montana's famous Glacier National Park. You can see that it's receding quite a bit. And this image was also taken in Glacier National Park. Here we see the Grinnell Glacier on the left and the Salamander Glacier hanging above it on the cliff. They used to be one large glacier until the Grinnell retreated so much that they separated into 2 separate glaciers around 1929. So when Glacier National Park was established back in 1910, it was home to more than 150 glaciers. Today, only about 25 remain, and most are mere vestiges of what they once were. Looking ahead, if the current rate of melting continues, all of the park's glaciers are expected to disappear in the next decade or so. So when I'm out in the wilderness taking photographs for my various projects or just exploring, I frequently cross paths with wildlife. And these encounters tend to enliven the landscape and often motivate me to learn more about different animals, how they fit into their ecosystem, and the challenges they face as the environment changes. So the next few images are not really part of any formal project, but I thought it'd be fun to share them with you. And everybody likes animal pictures, right? I call this Rolly Bear. It was taken in Alaska while I was photographing glaciers, as you can see in the background of the image. Now, while grizzly bears are massive apex predators, their natural ecosystem, while they're in their natural ecosystem, I should say, but they're also threatened by habitat loss and now, unfortunately, unregulated hunting. Coyotes are also dealing with habitat loss, but as human activities all through the landscape, these clever creatures are adapting and not retreating, so they're showing up in some pretty interesting places. We've even had a few coyotes roaming around New York City in recent years. But this photo was taken out west in the Mojave Desert. Manatees are marine mammals that prefer warm water, but even though the global ocean temperature is going up, they face other challenges. These include the loss of seagrass beds, which is their main food source, as red tides or those large algae blooms caused by the fertilizer runoff in coastal areas become more frequent. That said, manatees are considered a conservation success story. They've been on the endangered species list, which started back in the late 1960s, but they've recently been downgraded from endangered to threatened, so that is some good news. Now, to conclude, I wanted to revisit something I mentioned earlier. That's about how art allows me to explore and learn about a topic that I'm interested in. So going back to my ocean work, I was really curious to learn more about this subject, and I eventually signed up for an oceanography class. It taught me a lot, but what really caught my interest was the interaction between the ocean and atmosphere and how that impacts weather and climate. From there, I was just inspired to learn as much as possible about the subject. I was simply hooked. Soon afterwards, I started the Weather Gamut, which is a website that discusses all things related to weather and climate change, including the arts. So I guess you can say that art led me to science, and science has given me a deeper view of nature that I try to share with my work. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Just to go a little bit deeper into your interests and how art led you to science, the aspect of your work on climate change, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that, when you first became interested in that or when you first began to create work on that subject.
Well, I've always been interested in nature, and climate change is essentially about the change of nature. And I would say I've always been aware of it, but I got really more intensely interested in it somewhere in, I don't know, where I started to look at fires and glaciers is what came out of it. So I would say that was in like the 2006 to 10 range, somewhere is where I really started to learn more about it. And I got more involved with the Climate Reality Project around 2013. So it all kind of blended together. So let's call it the 2010, 20-teens range.
Mm-hmm. Do you see your art as a form of activism?
That's a very good question. I don't know if I identify myself as an activist, but I would say I'm an advocate for the natural world. But the main goal of my work is to inform people about the wonder and workings of nature and to inspire concern for the natural world with a particular emphasis on climate change.
Yeah. And for you personally, has photographing like the wildfires and the glaciers melting, how has that personally affected you?
That's an interesting question. A lot of people ask me, like, why do I do that? Isn't it so depressing? And I always say, well, yeah, it is. It's terribly sad to see it happening, but the real depressing thing is not doing anything about it. So by photographing it and sharing it and making people more aware of it, I'm hoping we can do something about it.
Right. And I was wondering if you could comment on how travel plays into your work. whether
I
you
knew that.
traveled to see particular landscapes or if you ended up there in some other way.
A little bit of both. I mean, the glaciers, I have a checklist of, there are only about 9 states that have glaciers, and I've done 6 so far, so I'm, very methodically going through them. And other things like the wildfires, you can't really travel to see a wildfire because, you don't really know where they're going to be. They can
Right.
happen spontaneously. And I'm on the East Coast and most of them are on the West Coast. So while I'm there, they just kind of happen around me. So I just take advantage of that. And the animals, of course, I'm out there. It's kind of like a behind the scenes look of what I'm doing and what else I'm seeing besides the pictures I show in a formal project.
Yeah. So you've covered several different materials in here, including photography and painting and wax. Do you have a favorite out of those or something you're more drawn to?
That's a tough question. That's like asking someone to pick their favorite child. But I like anything that gets me outside and exploring. And I love being outside. I just love nature. I love being out there in it, exploring it, learning about it. So, you know, right now my current project is the glacier project. So I'd have to say that one just because it's what I'm focused on right now.
Mm-hmm. During this lockdown time, have you been creating anything?
That's a very interesting question. I think a lot of artists have been struggling with that, especially those who have to travel or go out to see things. My goal this summer was to kind of try to finish up the glacier project, but with the travel situation the way it is, it's really on hold until I can travel safely or at least feel safe about traveling.
Right.
So what I'm doing, another project I have is not as visual, it's more literary. I've been doing research on environmental history and how art plays a part in policy. So I've done a little of that in the past, and I'm just taking a deeper dive into that while I have the time.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit more about that, how art plays into policy and environmental history?
Sure. Well, in the past, like for example, Yellowstone National Park, it was long known as a place where hell bubbles up because of all the stinky sulfur pits and the geysers and stuff. It wasn't a place that people considered farmable, and so it was just avoided. And when after the Civil War, they had people going out to explore areas that railroads could go through. So then these expeditions tended to bring artists because they needed to show people back home what it looked like, not just write numbers and reports. And so, for example, Yellowstone National Park is probably the most famous example of it. But you had William Henry Jackson and Thomas Moran were 2 artists that went along on that. And when their images came back to the East, they were a sensation. And it got people really excited about the area. They were exhibited, they were put in magazines, they were even used to help lobby Congress to create a national park as visuals. And so they helped. I mean, there's always more to a legislative process than just imagery, but they really helped raise public awareness and public opinion for those events for the park to become a reality. So it went from a place where hell bubbles up to a natural wonderland with a lot of help from visual artists.
Wow, that's really cool. Would you be able to go back and talk a little more in depth about the photograms that you mentioned, about the process, how those are created?
Sure. Photograms are a cameraless image, so it's working with photochemicals as opposed to a camera. So what I would do is it was palladium based, so I would mix the chemicals, smear them on paper, and then you have to let them dry. So it's basically a negative, well, kind of. And then, so what I would do is then carry the paper out into a break of a wave, and the water would come up on the wave. Whatever's in the water, sand, seaweed, sticks, stones, whatever, would form a pattern on the paper in the movement of the water. Wave would retreat, and it would expose in the UV light of the sun.
Wow.
So it would become a one-of-a-kind, unique document of the movement of matter in that particular ocean wave. And what's interesting about that project, first of all, it was a lot of fun to make. It was very physical. and it got me in the water in all seasons, which was fun. And as I mentioned, the color of the images were influenced by the temperature of the water.
Hmm.
But, you got your thinking about fractals, fractal theory, and how like the self-similarity of structure is similar regardless of scale. So if you look at a satellite image of a river delta and one of the photograms, you'll see similarities. So it's like as close as you could possibly be to as far as we can see at the moment. And there's similarities to that. I find that fascinating.
That's really fascinating. Yeah. I mean, clearly water is fascinating, but what draws you to it in general?
Oh, I mean, I've always been a water person. I've been a swimmer most of my life. I still swim. I love any kind of water sport there is, anything to be in the water. I just love, I guess on the physical side, I love water and the way it moves and the way I can move in it.
Mhm.
And then also on the aesthetic side, I love also the way it moves, but also the way it reflects and carries things and shapes things. And it's just endlessly fascinating.
Yeah. Is there, you mentioned the glacier project is something that you're hoping to continue working on. Is there another environmental landscape or place that you're hoping to travel to?
The next glacier project, what's funny is there are different types of glaciers. So I've been focused mainly on, what we consider a traditional glacier, but there's something called rock glaciers, which are also technically glaciers, but they're not as aesthetically obvious. And they're in the state of Utah and Nevada. So I'm going to add them to the list. So I'll have a total of 9 states. But the last remaining state of like a traditional, what you think of as a glacier, is in California. And I've tried 3 times to photograph glaciers in California, and I've been thwarted 3 times because of wildfires.
Oh.
So it's kind of like this weird cycle because you have to wait for the snow around the glaciers to melt enough to A, get there, and B, to identify the glacier as separate than just a field of snow. But that's also when the summer's in full swing, and that's when the fires start. So it's been very difficult. You'd think California would be easy, but it's the hardest one so far.
Wow. Great. Well, thank you so much. We do have some questions coming in, so I'll hand it over to Julia.
Great.
Hey, Melissa, thank you so much for sharing your work with us today, and thanks to everyone who's tuned in. So we have a couple questions here that we'll get to. Let's see. Question about the environmental policy, art and environmental policy. Have you ever used any of your works to speak to politics or to politicians directly or move legislators towards a specific goal?
I have not personally lobbied anybody, but I'd be more than willing to share the work if people are interested in doing something like that.
Great, good to know. So you can see on the screen here how to get in touch with Melissa.
There's a group called Citizens Climate Lobby. They do a lot of work like that, but I don't think anyone's ever been interested in art yet.
Not yet, that's the key word. Another question in, what artists do you follow or are you inspired by? So, living contemporary artists or maybe people from our artistic, your artistic family tree, as it were.
That's a good way of phrasing it. I like that. There's a lot. Historically to contemporary, I mean, everyone from like Turner to Anish Kapoor, is in between. But I have to say right now, just because of my interest in environmental policy and artistic ways of looking at that, I'm really interested in the Hudson River School, the artists there. So anyone from like Frederick Church, Thomas Cole, Albert Bierstadt, they actually all played, even if it was a rather subtle or not so subtle way of influencing people to understand and look at the landscape in a different way and to even raise awareness about what was going on. I mean, Albert Bierstadt had a painting called The Last Buffalo as they were going extinct. The another person that really jumps out at me though is Alexander von Humboldt. He was if you don't know who he is, he was a Prussian, I should say, Prussian or German polymath from the early 1800s, and he really blended art and science and exploration, and has this wonderful painting. I think it's called The Unity of Nature, or at least that's the English version of it. And it just shows like climate zones and what grows where, and it's like this blend of art and science. It's a little bit of an infographic, but it really shows the blend of like how different disciplines come together in one mind and can really change the way other people think and see things.
Very cool. And yeah, I was hoping you could share with people a little bit about your appearances on the Weather Channel. We've been kind of talking around like how do you engage people? How do you engage different types of people through imagery or action? And that's, obviously a really public way to, bring an artist on a Weather Channel is quite interesting and awesome. So yeah, if you want to share a little bit about your experience of doing that and what you felt like your role was and that type of thing.
Well, I'm a big fan of the Weather Channel. I mean, I write about weather and climate, and I think they do an amazing job. That's what their sole focus is. And I believe they bought a company called Weather Underground, which I'm part of kind of in a weird peripheral way. I have my own weather station. So I provide weather data directly to them, and they use that in their forecasts. And
So where's your weather station?
It's on the fire escape outside my New York City apartment.
That's amazing. I didn't know you could have a weather station just that was small enough to fit on a fire escape.
About that big.
How cool.
I think that's one of the reasons that they found me interesting, was because I'm in the middle of Manhattan with a weather station. But so what they did a couple of years ago is they had a whole series of, they would have people who were contributing data on, so they would come and talk about what was going on in their area. And so I did that a few times, and that was really a thrill and an honor really to be part of it. And we didn't really talk too much about art. I mean, they highlighted a few things here and there, and they're very focused on raising awareness about climate change, which is great. So we talked very little about that, but it was mostly about like current situations and data-driven observations.
Very cool. And then, yeah, one last question here. Climate change is really easy to feel like scared and afraid and sad and all of these things. Your work, at least for me, and I'm kind of adding on to this question here, it highlights so many aspects of our climate, from wildfires to just the beauty of bodies of water. So the question is, what are your thoughts about the future? Are you hopeful? Are you pessimistic? Are you some mix between?
I would say I'm cautiously optimistic, because we know what the problem is. We know what we need to do to fix it, even if it will take a long haul approach. We just need the will to do it. So as long as, it's not an unknown, we know what we need to do. It's just a matter of getting it done. So it's about public awareness and political will.
Well, that is a great note to end on. Thank you so much, Melissa, for sharing your work. And I hope to see you in New York sometime soon. Until then, I look forward to your updates on your blog. And Carrie, I will let you wrap us up here.
Great. Yeah, thank you so much. It's been wonderful to learn about your work and your research. And thanks for everyone who joined us for tuning in. If you missed any part of this or want to look back on it, it will be posted on our YouTube channel, which we will announce through our social media pages. And as always, to stay up to date on what we're doing, you can join our mailing list at sciartinitiative.org. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Everyone. Bye, Melissa.
Bye.